What would you do if the people who gave you life put a price tag on it? Clara thought she was attending an upscale family dinner, not her own auction. But when her parents traded her to monsters to clear their debts, an even darker king came to collect. Clara Hayes always knew her parents were reckless. Richard and Brenda Hayes were the kind of people who chased the illusion of wealth, sinking millions into failed real estate ventures and underground gambling rings in Chicago's most unsavory corners. They lived in a sprawling Gold Coast penthouse they could no longer afford, keeping up appearances while drowning in a sea of hidden ledgers and terrifying phone calls. But Clara, a 23-year-old architectural student, never imagined that their desperation would culminate in her becoming collateral. It started on a freezing Tuesday evening in November. Richard had insisted Clara wear the vintage silk dress he had bought her for her birthday. He claimed they were meeting an angel investor at an exclusive club downtown, a man who was going to wipe their financial slate clean. Brenda had refused to look Clara in the eye the entire car ride, her hands trembling as she aggressively twisted her wedding ring. They arrived at the subterranean entrance of the Obsidian Club, a place not listed on any map tucked beneath the roaring traffic of the city. The air inside was heavy with the scent of copper, expensive cologne, and ancient dust. Clara's stomach plummeted as they were escorted into a dimly lit, soundproofed VIP room. Sitting at the end of a long mahogany table was Tobias Reed. Tobias was a man the local police knew, but never touched. He was impeccably dressed, terrifyingly still, and his skin possessed an unnerving, translucent pallor. Clara had heard whispers of the syndicate, the hidden elite who truly ran the city's underground, but she had always assumed they were just ruthless mobsters. She didn't know they weren't human. Richard. Brenda. Tobias purred his voice like velvet sliding over glass. His eyes, completely devoid of warmth, shifted to Clara. And the asset. You kept your word. We did, Richard said, his voice cracking. He practically shoved Clara forward. She's yours. The debt is settled. All 4.2 million. Clara stumbled her mind, struggling to process the words. The asset. She looked at her father, expecting a punchline to a terrible joke. Dad, what is he talking about? It's the only way, Clara, Brenda whispered, finally looking up, her face streaked with selfish tears. They were going to kill us. Tobias, he likes you. You'll be taken care of. Tobias slid a thick, ancient-looking parchment across the table. It wasn't a standard legal document. The ink seemed to shimmer, bound by archaic symbols. Sign the transfer of ownership, Richard. Once her blood binds to the parchment, your ledger is clean. She will join my private collection. Clara lunged toward the door, panic seizing her chest, but two massive guards materialized from the shadows, their grip on her arms feeling like cold iron. She screamed, fighting wildly, but they held her with a terrifying, effortless strength. She watched in absolute horror as her father picked up the heavy fountain pen. He didn't even hesitate. He signed his name, essentially selling his only daughter into supernatural slavery to save his own skin. Tobias smiled, exposing teeth that were just a fraction too sharp. Perfect. Now bring her to the desk. She needs to seal it. Before the guards could drag Clara forward, the temperature in the room plummeted. The heavy oak doors of the VIP suite didn't just open. They shattered inward, exploding into violent splinters that rained across the expensive rugs. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Tobias Reed, a monster in his own right, shrank back into his chair. Walking through the ruined doorway was a man who seemed to swallow the light around him. He was tall, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, but his presence was anything but human. His eyes were a mesmerizing, terrifying shade of violet, and the sheer authority radiating from him forced the two guards holding Clara to drop to their knees, instinctively releasing her. This was Lucian Croft. In the hidden world of the nocturnal elite, There were lords, there were politicians, and then there was the sovereign. Lucien did not govern the city. He owned it. Tobias. Lucien's voice was a low rumble that vibrated in Clara's chest. You are conducting a trade in my territory, without my sanction. My king, Tobias stammered, the arrogance completely wiped from his pale face. He stood up, bowing deeply. This is a private debt collection, a minor human transaction. I didn't think it warranted your attention. Lucien's gaze shifted to Clara. She was trembling, breathing heavily, rubbing the bruises forming on her arms. When his violet eyes met hers, the world seemed to stop. There was a sudden, violent shift in the room's energy, a heavy, suffocating pressure that made Clara gasp for air. Lucien looked at her not as a piece of meat, but with a fierce, almost terrifying recognition. He stepped forward completely, ignoring the cowering parents and the trembling Tobias. He reached the mahogany table, looking down at the ancient glowing contract that bore Richard's signature. She is not for sale, Lucien said quietly. But the debt. Tobias started desperate to salvage his prize. Lucien's hand shot out. He didn't just tear the magical contract, he crushed it. The ancient parchment burst into a shower of white-hot sparks, the binding magic screaming as it was destroyed by a superior force. The supernatural backlash blew Tobias backward into the wall, shattering the framed artwork behind him. The contract is void, Lucien commanded, his voice echoing with undeniable power. He turned his back on the carnage and extended a large, impeccably tailored arm toward Clara. Come with me. Clara stood frozen. Her parents were huddled in the corner, whimpering like frightened animals. The men who had just tried to buy her were bleeding on the floor, and the man extending his hand to her had just shattered an unholy magical contract with his bare hands. Who are you? Clara whispered, her voice barely audible over the ringing in her ears. The only person in this room who isn't going to let you die tonight. Lucien replied, his tone chillingly calm. Take my hand, Clara Hayes, or stay with the people who just sold you. She looked at her father. Richard wouldn't even meet her eyes. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. She had no family anymore. They were dead to her. Trembling, Clara reached out and placed her hand in Lucien's. His skin was cool, firm, and radiated an undeniable strength. The moment their skin touched, a strange shockwave shot up her arm, settling a bizarre calm over her panicked heart. Lucien pulled her gently but firmly to his side, shielding her body with his own. He looked back at Tobias, who was coughing up dark blood on the floor. If anyone from the syndicate approaches this woman, I will strip the flesh from your bones and leave you for the sun, Lucien warned, the threat hanging heavy in the freezing air. He didn't even spare a glance for Clara's parents. He led her out of the ruined room, through the hidden corridors of the club. The patrons, all unnaturally beautiful pale figures, parted for them, like the Red Sea, bowing their heads in deep reverence. Clara was ushered out into the freezing Chicago night and into the back of a waiting armored Maybach. The doors closed, sealing them in a quiet, luxurious bubble. As the car sped away toward the North Shore, Clara finally broke down. The adrenaline faded, leaving only the crushing reality of her parents' betrayal. She pulled her knees to her chest, sobbing quietly into the vintage silk dress she had been dressed up in, like a sacrificial lamb. Lucien didn't try to comfort her with empty words. He simply poured a glass of amber liquid from the car's compartment and handed it to her. Drink. It will steady your nerves. She took at her hands, shaking so badly she almost spilled it. Are you going to eat me? She asked bluntly, the liquor burning a trail of fire down her throat. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched Lucien's lips. If I wanted to consume you, Clara, I wouldn't have ruined a $4 million transaction and destroyed a binding blood pact to do it. You are safe. Why? Clara demanded, wiping her tears furiously. Why would someone like you, a king or whatever he called you, care about a human's debt? What do you want from me?" Lucienne leaned back into the leather seat, studying her with those piercing violet eyes. "Because your parents did not just sell you for gambling debts, Clara. They sold you because of what you are, and what they have been doing to you." Clara frowned, her heart rate spiking again. "What are you talking about? I'm just an architecture student. I'm nobody. Have you ever wondered why you have to take those specialized iron supplements your mother gives you? The vitamins she insists you cannot live without?" Lucienne asked, his voice softening just a fraction, hinting at a restrained anger. Clara froze. Since she was 16, she had suffered from what her mother claimed was severe anemia. Brenda personally ordered special tinctures from an exclusive apothecary, watching Clara swallow them every single morning. She said my blood was weak. "Your blood isn't weak," Lucienne corrected, his eyes darkening. "It is profoundly unique. You carry a dormant ancient lineage, a very specific bloodline that is intoxicating to my kind. Those vitamins were a sweetening agent, a preservative. Your parents have been cultivating you like a prized vintage wine for years, waiting for the market price to peak." The words hit Clara like physical blows. The nausea was overwhelming. Her entire life, her mother's care, her father's protective rules about where she went, it wasn't love. It was farming. They had been fattening the calf for slaughter. Tobias discovered what you were. Lucienne continued, his gaze never leaving her face. "He intended to keep you as a permanent captive feeder. You would have been drained, slowly kept barely alive for decades to sustain him and his elite clients." Clara dropped the crystal glass. It shattered on the floor of the car, but neither of them flinched. The absolute horror of her reality stripped away whatever was left of her old life. "And you," she whispered, staring at the monster who had saved her. "Do you want to keep me in a cage, too?" Lucian leaned forward, the terrifying aura of the sovereign giving way to something deeply intense and violently protective. He reached out his thumb, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. The touch was electric. "I brought you to my home because the moment Tobias registered your bloodline in the syndicate, every predator in this city caught your scent," Lucienne said softly. "You are walking prey in my world, Clara. The only place you will survive is by my side. I didn't take you to cage you. I took you to declare you untouchable." The car passed through massive wrought-iron gates, revealing a sprawling Gothic estate hidden within a heavily wooded cliffside overlooking Lake Michigan. Clara looked up at the looming stone walls. She had just traded a prison built by her own parents for a fortress ruled by a vampire king. But as she looked back at Lucian's unwavering, intense gaze, a strange realization washed over her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to run away. Sunlight was a theoretical concept inside the Croft estate. When Clara Hayes finally opened her eyes, she was enveloped in the soft ambient glow of Tiffany lamps and a roaring fireplace. She lay in the center of a massive four-poster bed, draped in heavy crimson velvet, her bruised arms wrapped tightly around the silk sheets. For a fleeting, merciful second, she thought the previous night had been a terrifying hallucination. Then she remembered the shattered oak doors, the glowing contract, and her father's signature. She wasn't just a daughter anymore. She was an artifact. Clara pushed herself out of bed, her bare feet sinking into the thick Persian rug. As an architecture student, her mind instinctively sought order in her surroundings. The room was a masterpiece of late Gothic revival, featuring vaulted ceilings with intricate mahogany tracery and heavy stone mullions that framed the reinforced UV-tinted windows. The structural integrity of the room was flawless, unlike the absolute collapse of her own life. Her parents, Richard and Brenda, had built a facade of wealth using shell corporations and predatory loans only to use their own flesh and blood as the final beam to hold up their crumbling empire. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The heavy oak door swung open, revealing a tall, impeccably dressed woman with sharp cheekbones and raven hair pulled into a severe chignon. "Good evening, Miss Hayes," the woman said, her voice carrying a crisp British accent. "My name is Genevieve. I am the head of the household staff. Lord Croft requested that I bring you proper attire and see to your immediate comfort." Genevieve set a series of garment bags on the settee. She didn't have the translucent pallor of Tobias Reed, but there was an unmistakable, terrifying grace in her movements that marked her as one of Lucian's kind. "Is he going to keep me locked in this room?" Clara asked, her voice raspy. "Lord Croft does not deal in cages," Genevieve replied, offering a sympathetic but guarded smile. "You have the run of the estate. However, the perimeter is secured by private military contractors, both human and otherwise. You are the most valuable asset in the city right now. Stepping beyond the gates would be a fatal miscalculation." 30 minutes later, dressed in a thick cashmere sweater and tailored trousers Genevieve had provided, Clara ventured down the grand staircase. The mansion was a labyrinth of shadows and opulence, filled with priceless antiquities and heavily armed guards who stood as still as statues. She found Lucian in the library, a massive 2-story rotunda, lined with leather-bound volumes and illuminated by a central chandelier. He was standing by a massive oak desk, poring over a series of architectural blueprints and financial ledgers, flanked by a broad-shouldered man with a severe expression. "The syndicate is mobilizing Lucian," the other man was saying, tapping a heavy gold signet ring against the desk. "Reginald Dupont called a tribunal. They are arguing that by destroying a signed blood pact, you have violated the 1923 Concord. They are threatening to freeze the offshore accounts. Let Dupont throw his little tantrum, Alistair," Lucian replied smoothly, his violet eyes tracking the documents. "The Dupont family built their chemical empire on the backs of stolen human patents. They have no moral high ground. Block their access to the Chicago ports. If they want to play a game of economic attrition, we will starve their shell companies." Lucian paused, his acute senses registering Clara's presence in the doorway long before Alistair noticed her. The Vampire King dismissed his second-in-command with a subtle wave of his hand. Alistair offered Clara a stiff bow before vanishing into the shadows of the corridor. "You look better," Lucian said, his voice a low, resonant hum that immediately soothed the lingering anxiety in Clara's chest. He stepped away from the desk, moving toward her with that impossible predatory grace. "I heard what you were saying," Clara said, crossing her arms defensively. "You're talking about embargoes and shell companies. I thought you were vampires, not Wall Street bankers." A faint smile touched Lucian's lips. "The two are not mutually exclusive, Clara. The modern supernatural world operates exactly like the human elite. Do you honestly think the Astor family or the Vanderbilts amassed their historical fortunes through sheer capitalism, blood debts, and immortal backing have funded American dynasties since the Gilded Age? We don't hide in crypts anymore. We hide in boardrooms." He gestured for her to sit in a plush leather armchair by the fire. He took the seat opposite her, leaning forward, his intense gaze locking onto hers. "Your parents," Lucian began, his tone dropping an octave, "were incredibly foolish to deal with Tobias. They were desperate to maintain their social standing, so they turned to the black market. But Tobias is just a middleman. The man Alistair just mentioned, Reginald Dupont, is a senior member of the High Council, and he has taken a personal interest in your bloodline." "Because of my rare blood?" Clara asked bitterly. "What makes me so special that a billionaire vampire wants to drink me? It is not just about sustenance. Lucian explained, his expression turning deadly serious. You carry the sanguis regalis, the sovereign blood. It is a genetic anomaly that appears in humans perhaps once every 3 centuries. To a vampire, drinking your blood does not just provide nourishment. It grants a permanent exponential amplification of our physical and psychic power. If a high-ranking syndicate member like DuPont were to consume you, he would become powerful enough to challenge my throne. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. So I'm a weapon. You are a catalyst, Lucien corrected gently. He reached out his large, cool hand, covering her trembling hands where they rested on her lap. The electric jolt of his touch sent a shiver down her spine that had absolutely nothing to do with fear. But your blood only yields that power if it is taken willingly. If they take it by force, it will sustain them, but it will not empower them. That is why your parents were keeping you so compliant. They were waiting for Tobias to find a way to psychologically break you, to force a willing submission. The betrayal stung all over again, a hot knife twisting in her ribs. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She looked down at Lucian's hand, covering hers. It was strong lethal, and yet it was the only thing holding her together. And you, Clara whispered, looking up into his mesmerizing violet eyes. If my blood makes you a god, why haven't you asked for it? Lucian's gaze darkened a storm of centuries-old restraint, battling an undeniable primal hunger. He slowly trailed his thumb across her knuckles, sending heat rushing to her cheeks. Because a king does not beg for scraps, Clara, he said softly, his voice vibrating with a terrifying intimacy. And more importantly, because looking at you, I find myself entirely uninterested in your blood and violently possessive of your life. The fragile piece of the Croft estate shattered 3 nights later. Clara was in the library, sketching a redesign of the mansion's eastern wing, finding solace in the geometric precision of her charcoal pencils. Lucian had been locked in his study with Genevieve and Alistair dealing with the escalating financial war against the syndicate. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors of the library slammed shut, the metallic click of the locks echoing like a gunshot. The temperature in the room plummeted, and the Tiffany lamps flickered wildly before dying, completely plunging the massive rotunda into darkness. Clara dropped her pencil, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Lucian," she called out, stepping back from the desk. "The king is currently indisposed, little bird." A wet, rasping voice echoed from the shadows. Out of the darkness stepped Tobias Reed. He looked drastically different from the slick, arrogant mobster at the Obsidian Club. The left side of his face was heavily scarred, a horrific burn mark from where Lucian's magic had thrown him against the wall. He was flanked by 4 massive, heavily armed mercenaries wearing tactical gear lined with silver and ultraviolet emitters. "How did you get in here?" Clara demanded, backing away toward the fireplace, her hands blindly searching the mantel for anything she could use as a weapon. "Reginald DuPont has very deep pockets, and even the king's guards have their price." Tobias sneered, pulling a terrifyingly long, silver-edged blade from his coat. "Lucian thought he could hide you behind his money and his titles, but DuPont wants his prize, and I want the satisfaction of dragging you out of here by your hair." Before Tobias could take another step, the exterior glass of the reinforced window exploded inward in a shower of brilliant, violent shards. Lucien landed in the center of the room, like a falling star, the sheer kinetic force of his arrival shattering the floorboards. His tailored suit was torn, and dark blood stained his crisp white shirt, but his eyes were glowing with an unholy, incandescent violet light. Alistair dropped into the room a second later, moving with blinding speed to intercept the mercenaries. "Tobias!" Lucien roared a sound that shook the very foundations of the estate. "I told you what would happen if you came near her." The library erupted into a war zone. Alistair tore through the tactical guards, but these were elite syndicate enforcers. They activated ultraviolet flashbangs, filling the room with searing artificial sunlight that made the vampires hiss in agony. Tobias lunged at Clara, but Lucian intercepted him. The two immortals clashed with a sickening sound of bone and steel. Lucien was infinitely stronger, effortlessly disarming Tobias and driving him to his knees. But as Lucien raised his hand to deliver the fatal strike, one of the dying mercenaries triggered a specialized pneumatic dart gun. A thick glass syringe filled with a glowing corrosive green liquid, dead man's blood mixed with synthesized liquid silver, struck Lucian directly in the chest. Lucian gasped, his glowing eyes flickering violently as he collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest. The poison immediately began mapping its way through his veins, burning him from the inside out. Tobias scrambled backward, laughing a wet, ugly laugh. "It's over, Your Majesty," Tobias spat, pulling a secondary dagger. "DuPont's chemists designed that specifically for your royal metabolism. In 5 minutes, your heart will turn to ash." Alistair was pinned down under heavy suppressing fire from the remaining guards, unable to reach his king. Clara watched in absolute horror as the indestructible man who had saved her life began to turn grey, his breathing ragged and shallow. "You are a catalyst," Lucien's words echoed in her mind. "If taken willingly, it grants an exponential amplification of power." Clara didn't think. She moved. She grabbed the sharpest shard of the shattered window glass from the floor and sprinted toward Lucian, dropping to her knees beside him. "Clara, run!" Lucien choked out, black veins crawling up his neck. "Shut up!" she cried, tears blurring her vision. She looked at Tobias, who was slowly advancing, relishing the kill. Then she looked down at Lucien. "You said my blood could heal. You said it could give you power. It has to be willing," Lucien gritted out, shaking his head. "I won't take it." "I am giving it to you," Clara screamed. Without a second's hesitation, she pressed the glass shard to her own palm and sliced it open. Bright crimson blood welled up instantly, the scent of it immediately changing the atmosphere in the room. It smelled like crushed roses, ozone, and pure, concentrated life. She pressed her bleeding hand forcefully against Lucian's mouth. "Take it, Lucian. Save us." Lucian's eyes snapped open. The primal predatory instinct took over. But as his lips touched her palm, there was a profound gentleness in his grip. As he consumed her blood, a blinding physical shockwave of energy exploded from them. The green poison blackening his veins was instantly eradicated, vaporized by the sheer, overwhelming purity of the sanguis regalis. When Lucian rose to his feet, the room fell dead silent. He didn't just look healed, he looked like a god of war. The violet light radiating from him was so intense it shattered the remaining light fixtures in the room. Tobias dropped his dagger, falling to his knees in absolute terror. "No. Please." Lucian didn't utter a single word. He simply raised his hand, and the kinetic force of his magic snapped Tobias's neck with a sharp, brutal crack. The remaining guards dropped their weapons and fled only to be immediately hunted down by Alistair in the corridors. The battle was over in seconds. Lucien stood amidst the ruin of his library, breathing heavily before turning back to Clara. She was sitting on the floor, clutching her bandaged hand, trembling from the adrenaline. He crossed the room in the blink of an eye, dropping to his knees before her. He carefully took her injured hand, pressing a soft, reverent kiss to her uninjured knuckles. "You bound yourself to me," he whispered, his eyes filled with a terrifying, beautiful devotion. "By freely giving your blood, you didn't just heal me, Clara. You crowned yourself. The Syndicate will never be able to touch you now. You are not a human asset anymore. You are the sovereign queen." Clara looked into his eyes, realizing that the frightened girl who had been sold at an auction was dead. Her parents, Richard and Brenda, would soon face their own mortal ruin, already under federal investigation by the SEC after Lucian's financial retaliation completely exposed their fraudulent empire. They would rot in a human prison, abandoned by the monsters they had tried to appease. But Clara had found her place. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against Lucian's. "Then show me how to rule," she whispered. That started as a desperate transaction of betrayal, turned into an unbreakable bond of supernatural power. Clara Hayes didn't just escape the auction block. She claimed a throne alongside the Vampire King, leaving her treacherous parents to face mortal justice. The Syndicate is reeling, but the real war for the nocturnal elite has just begun. If you loved this dramatic, twist-filled vampire romance, hit that like button, leave a comment about your favorite moment, and subscribe for more thrilling, dark romance stories.